welcome to this webinar titled Demystifying Snowpark, Setup for Data Engineering 101 The Basics with Ascend.io and also Snowflake. Jono, would you like to advance the slides for us, please? And I'll go ahead and introduce who we have on the panel here today. So we have a couple of experts here, data pipeline experts and Ascend experts. So I'd like to introduce John Osborne, who is our field CTO at Ascend.io. John, welcome. Thank you for joining this morning.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Appreciate you moderating this thing, and happy to get going.
Absolutely, yeah. And we also have our field data engineer, Ayush Maganahali. Ayush, welcome and good morning.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for being here.
Perfect. And we're also pleased to be joined by Josh Wayburn, who is a solution architect at Snowflake. Josh, good morning to you.
Good morning, everyone.
Awesome. All right.
I mean, when we were setting this up, I figured Josh had to be here to answer the Snowflake questions. So,
absolutely, yeah. So, just a quick background on the panel before we kind of dive into some of the content that we got here today. So, we've got a number of people on the line here that their whole job is to build data pipelines and help their customers be successful, help our joint customers be successful when building data pipelines. Between the panel here today, we've got decades of experience working with technologies like Python and schedulers and SQL and all kinds of stuff to do with working with data, both in the before times of on-prem and the now times of the amazing power that you get in the cloud with Snowflake. And so can't wait to dive into all of this stuff with you all. And we're going to be talking about this as we go. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we kick off here. So this is a live webinar, which means that you're going to get a chance to work alongside of us. So if you have any questions or you run into any problems as you're kind of following along here, please feel free to drop those questions into the chat and we'll be here to help you as you go. So if you get stuck in real time, you consider us kind of your real-time support system to kind of help you get unblocked. So please go ahead and make use of that. If you have any other generic questions about the content or about what we're talking about here today, please go ahead and also drop those into the chat. We'll have some time for Q&A towards the end of the session here today. This session is going to be recorded and we will distribute the recording to the attendees and all the registrants as well, so that you can go back and review it whenever you need to. So you don't need to take frantic notes. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to John Osborne to kick us off here. John, please take it away.
Great, thanks, Paul. So one of the things that I love about these webinars is it's a progression of content. So Ayush, I think you did a webinar a couple weeks ago, maybe about doing some getting started stuff with Python, right?
Yeah, I did. It was, I think, one of our first webinars, and it was related to general Python. But
okay, awesome, great. And then Josh, you and I did a Snowpark 1 during our summit, I think, right? So, so this one, that one's already out on YouTube. So if you want to check it out, that's cool.
Yep.
Appreciate you willing to come back for yet another dip in the water. It's great. So today what we're going to do real quick on the agenda, I want to cover some basics around Python, how the runtime works, and then Josh and I will talk through like Python with Snowpark and maybe a little history lesson there about why it is what it is, and then a little bit about how it works. And then here at Ascend, we are great partners with Snowflake in that we pay attention to each other's work and we try and augment and make Snowflake more awesome than it already is. So one of the things that we like to do, though, is take some of their getting started guides and then show customers, potential customers, existing customers, like how to do maybe some out of the box stuff in Snowflake and how you do it in Ascend. So Ayush will take us through one of the Snowflake getting started guides, but actually do it in Ascend, so you can compare and contrast how that works. So hopefully that sounds like an interesting agenda, and hopefully I know we're going to get it done in the allotted time, but hopefully we get enough treatment of all the categories, so that'd be great. So the first thing we kind of want to talk through is like, if you're going to be listening to the first part of the webinar, we're going to cover some Python stuff, but Ayush is going to use actually Ascend. So Ayush, you want to talk through maybe what people need to do real quick here about setting up an account if you actually want to use Ascend during the webinar, or if you're listening to the recording later and you want to set up an account?
yeah, there'll be primarily two things that you'll need in order to do this lab or to really use Ascend in the future, especially with Snowflake. And that's to get an Ascend account, which fairly straightforward. You can see here is just create an account, right? Once you're there, you'll be taken to another page where you'll see Ascend.io sign up. Pretty straightforward, just need your basic information, put in an email. We generally suggest using the Google link at the bottom, or as in using that as your authenticator, but any of the four here. And from there, your Ascend.io account is effectively set up once you've entered this information.
And one thing I noticed, it's a quirk, but maybe not a quirk, is the email you put in the form doesn't actually have to be the same email that you authenticate with Google, or does it?
I believe it should authenticate with Google.
Okay. Yeah. So make sure you use the same email here that you're going to use when the Google Auth page comes up. So that's good. Good to know.
From there, you'll be taken to this or this page. And so for those of you who maybe aren't working with Snowflake, you can work with other data planes here as well. But since we're talking about Snowflake in general, we also do recommend connecting your Snowflake account here. And don't worry if you don't have any Snowflake accounts yet. We'll go over that in a little bit. But here we're just going to go through this step-by-step process of picking Snowflake and then connecting to your resources. So here you're just going to pick Snowflake as your cloud data platform.
And since we're using Snowpark, like obviously you're going to have to use Snowflake. So that's good. Great, thanks, Ayush. So for folks who actually want to create an account and follow along, that's a great getting started guide. We'll also talk about the partner connect tile and some other Snowflake things, I think, right before we start the lab. So that'd be great. But so the first question, this is really simple, like what is Python? But more deeply, like why do we talk about Python and data engineering, data flows, and that kind of stuff? I think, Josh, for a long time, the preferred language was SQL, right? From the 60s and 70s. That was like the only language we could use, right?
Yep.
And so as these higher level languages came about, Python and C, of course, C++, and all those kind of languages, we started to get smarter and smarter about how to build them. And I think when we're using the runtime environment here with Python, what we're really doing is taking this high level language and we're compiling it into this virtual machine. This is one example of a Python interpreter that you might run if you're in EC2 or Google Compute. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is converting this human readable stuff into machine readable language, and then combining it with a bunch of libraries and actually getting some value out of that. So that's how Python comes to run. And C#, I think, and JavaScript and a lot of the other interpreted languages or compiled languages actually go through a very similar data flow or a build flow here. So I think that's really important. I think some of the troubles come in, Josh, when we get to scale, though, with Python in particular, which is, if you are maybe an analyst or data scientist and you're running a single source file on your laptop, there's like limitations to what you can do, right? Like, maybe you don't have enough compute, maybe you don't have enough memory to actually process 1 billion records on your laptop or on your desktop or whatever. So at scale, platforms like Spark came to be over the years, right? Where we're building a Spark context, which is a client that's attaching to a cluster, and then the cluster is distributing the workload across like multiple compute and memory areas so that we can parallelize the work, which is, I guess, sort of the classic cloud way to get to scale, right? Which is taking a job, slicing it up, passing it off to a whole bunch of different workers, and then running through it that way, and then keeping track of, well, workers are doing what, and hopefully everything's good and you're done with the job later. But if not, maybe retrying some jobs is important. So at scale, processing Python starts to get a lot more complicated. And obviously at Ascend, we like data at scale. So we are very, not only we're really good at managing this, but we have some very strong opinions about how to write code and how to make it work, in particular with Python. And I think one of the things that, Josh, if you want to hop in, one of the things that Snowflake brought a few years ago, I forget the actual release date, but maybe you can tell us, Josh, but Snowflake produced Snowpark, which is a Python engine for Snowflake. So do you want to weigh in on a little history there from a Snowflake perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, to your point earlier, when we went to market, it was using a SQL compiler. Everything we did is speaking in SQL. And, the huge value customers saw there was from the elasticity you got in being able to, instantaneously scale SQL workloads up, down, and out. Hugely beneficial. You can run ETL at the same time as BI, and that was really powerful there. And what Snowpark has introduced is we've taken that same ethos around scaling should be simple. It should be instantaneous. It shouldn't be complex to manage things like upgrades in different runtime environments. And really what we've done, as you kind of walk through, is basically taken that compiler and now giving you the ability to run Python code, we will compile that, run that against our engine, and allow that same ease of scale, ease of management, but now being able to do it in not just SQL, Python, but also in Java.
That's awesome. So what you're telling us is you get similar performance out of Python now that you do out of SQL. Is that true?
Exactly. Yep.
But then, go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, and the benefit here too is really what we're doing under the covers. We're taking, just like PySpark is taking Python code and converting that into Spark executable. What Snowpark as a client library is really doing is taking that Python code, converting it to our SQL executable, which is what Snowflake understands. And the huge benefit there is the years and years we've spent in terms of optimizing that engine. All of those same optimizations are going to work natively with your Python code. So it's not a separate engine that you're optimizing. It's not a separate environment that you're having to manage. It's using the same optimized engine that's going to scale in order to just execute in the language you prefer.
So that means that, from a market perspective, Snowflake is bringing other cohorts of people to Snowflake via Snowpark. So if you're a Python person, maybe a data scientist, you might actually prefer that language out of SQL. And I do know actually some of our customers find things that they can do in Python that are either difficult or impossible in SQL. So I think that's cool too. And then back to your performance thing point. I have seen either somewhere between 10 and 100x faster performance for Snowpark versus PySpark, which executes outside the container. And I think that's because the compute doesn't get pushed in the same way, right, Josh?
Yeah. One of the things that Snowflake, you kind of get out of the box, but when you load data into Snowflake, we're very intelligent about how that data is loaded. And so when you go to process it, the first thing Snowflake's going to do is address and say, hey, only scan data that is relevant to the particular query or job that we're executing. And being able to be, we'll say, efficient or intelligent about only doing the hard work where hard work is needed is oftentimes what we're seeing, those dramatic performance improvements as compared to engines like Spark.
Yeah, excellent. Plus the data is a lot closer to the execution, right? Because it all executes within the Snowflake cloud somehow. Correct. Yes. So there's no egress.
Yeah, that's a huge part too, is what Snowflake is really trying to do is give you that central place to store your data and then bring the compute to the data rather than the traditional model of, hey, extract all of the data out of the lake, out of your source systems, wherever it is, pull it into your Spark engine and then push it back out. Our engine is just sitting on top, processing the data where it is. And you're seeing a lot of efficiency through that.
Awesome. Yeah, great. That's really cool. That's really cool stuff. Oops, I'm going the wrong way here. So if we're gonna actually go through maybe a little bit more deeper comparison, I put this slide together. Actually, Paul did, but we're gonna talk through it. But Josh, I think I highlighted the one at the bottom right corner, which is if you're using Snowpark on Snowflake, I know for a lot of our customers, that last point is the most relevant. I think you were just talking about that, which is the data isn't going to leave that Snowflake environment when you're running the Snowpark job, right?
Yep.
I mean, unless you're returning a data frame to the client or something, obviously, right? But I know that one of those middle ones too, the library management has been improving, and I think there's future roadmap plans for Snowflake to continue to improve library management in Snowflake, right, Josh?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've leveraged Anaconda as a way of, for the most popular libraries that are out there, to remove all that dependency management. We are working on things like PyTorch and some of the popular ML libraries, actually bringing those and having those managed as well. We do still have support for those third-party libraries that you want to bring into Snowflake. We also allow you to bring those libraries and give you a way to manage and register those inside the environment as well.
That's awesome. I know, because I know one of the things on our roadmap is a matching ML pipeline implementation that allows you to take ascend, automate the pipelining work, because that's what we do, but then push all that work down to those awesome
Yes,
components that
absolutely.
Snowflake is creating. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
and
that's really good.
You know, part of this that's just really important to note is the value you're driving here. You know, while there's compute efficiency and performance efficiency by having compute brought to the data, there's also a huge conversation to have around the security implications of that, right? And if you are creating a single security boundary for your data, both from data as well as we talk about library management, having one boundary in order to define and manage that security through, your ability to enforce compliance with all of the challenges customers are facing around things like GDPR and increasing regulations. Having that single security pane and governance pane to manage your data through, and not having to think about all of the different places you're pulling data out to process it, is also going to drive a lot of value for customers in being able to simplify the way that they're managing that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Josh. And I know that one of the things that our customers, at least when they first touch Ascend on Snowflake and fire up a Snowpark job, is that you get to go back and forth super easily between SQL and Snowpark. So you don't have to make a single choice around which language. You can actually combine them together. Because I know certain things in SQL are just pretty easy, right? Select count star works. So yeah, great, awesome. So I think we're at the point, I would love to talk about that all day, by the way, because I'm a total geek and I would love to know more about how it works, but we don't have that kind of time because we have Ayush, who's probably rolling his eyes at this other stuff, but actually wants to talk about Snowpark and the getting started guide. So just to tee it up, we have a QR code that's going to show up on a couple slides. That's actually a link to the Snowflake getting started guide that we're going to follow. Ayush, you want to tell us a little bit about what you're going to do? I think you're going to do two things, right? For us in general, and then I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. So what we're going to go over here is in the Snowflake Quick Start Guide. The Snowflake Quick Start Guide is intended to be an introduction to Snowpark and how you're going to be using Snowpark in the Snowflake environment. Here in Ascend, you can similarly use Snowpark, and we'll just be walking you through basically what it would look like from Snowflake and then translating that into Ascend and how that would be, a little bit easier, a little bit more efficient in terms of just being able to plug in your Snowpark transformations and still take advantage of Snowflake, but within the Ascend environment.
Yeah, so I think it's like, hey, if you don't have Ascend, like Snowflake does a great job telling you like how to do this. But if you have Ascend, you have certain advantages, right, Ayush?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay,
and so,
great.
You can get into the details, but everything from automating your own pipelines, making it more efficient, you kind of name it, we got it in terms of data pipeline orchestration.
Logging consolidation. I think you have a slide about that. But anyway, I'll stop talking, Ayush, so that you can kind of run us through the Snowflake version first, and then we'll shift gears and start the lab and do it in Ascend. So let's do that.
Cool. So if you're on the Snowflake Quick Start Guide, these will be the same slides that you're going through there. So if you don't want to follow along here, you can kind of go through it there. But this will be basically what you see there. And we're going to start off with the overall architecture. This is basically what you see when you are working with Snowpark, right? We have the client-side libraries, and this is where Snowpark does a lot of its work. So Snowpark ML API, taking advantage of the DataFrames, all of that kind of is what's happening on the client side. And then at the end of that quick start guide, which hopefully you haven't gotten to yet, but the UDS store procedures, being able to store things in Snowflake are what's sitting on the server side. And, Snowpark is still able to be stored there. So regardless of what you're working with in Snowpark, it's still a very powerful platform to be able to use within Snowflake. So this is exactly why we're kind of doing a lab on it, and why, if you're not using it currently, you should definitely be taking advantage of it. To get started, let's say you don't have a Snowflake account. I assume most of you who are at this webinar probably do, but let's say you're viewing it later on and you don't have a Snowflake account. You can actually set up the lab on the Snowflake side and the Quick Start Guide really easily by going to that link, and they'll handle the whole setup process for you. In case you wanted to do it on the Ascend side, what that ends up looking like is basically just creating a free account, and that will basically be handled just by going to Snowflake and signing up there.
And then Ayush, we have a partner connect tile, right? So even if you set up a free account, you can do that, right?
Yeah, this is a newer feature, which is why I kind of forgot to mention it, but that is something we are now offering. So definitely feel free to go there.
Yeah, I think you just go to the admin section and go to Partner Connect, and you click and you just add a little bit of information and it sets it all up for you, a database and the user and all that. So yeah, pretty easy. Awesome. Great. Step 2, Ayush. This is getting started with the actual Python part of the lab, right?
Yeah. So this is where you're going to start seeing like the actual code, where you're going to start working with things in Snowpark. And so, regardless of whether you're working with DataFrames, whatever, this is where things get started. And you have a bunch of ways that you can list here. Again, if you're working on the Snowflake Quick Start Guide, it'll all be listed there. But all we're doing is we're creating tables here, right? This looks slightly different in Ascend, where we're pulling in data from, an S3 bucket in this case, but the idea is the same. We just get the data from somewhere, right? Create a data frame.
Yeah, great. So I see some Python there. That's good. So step 3 would be creating the transformations, right? Because you want to load some data, then you actually want to do something with it, right?
Yeah.
Ayush?
Exactly. So Paul clicked through a couple of them, but basically the idea here is just you're creating a bunch of transforms, working with the data and creating the data product that you want at the end.
Yeah, it looks like this spend per month aggregation is something that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
So that's what the guide is doing.
And so you can do it with Snowpark, to be clear. Like I know we're only showing you a limited selection. We kind of clicked through a couple of them, but the point is that basically what you can do in Python, you can do in Snowpark. And so there's no reservation of being able to do what you want on Snowpark.
But again, this is a local environment on your local machine that you're actually running the jobs from, correct, Ayush? Yeah. Okay, great.
Cool. So this will be the view that you have in Snowpark. In Snowflake. If you were to go in and click set up the lab, this is basically exactly what it would set up for you. It'll just be a worksheet. If you run it, these are all the records that you get. It'll be pre-set up for you. So it's pretty straightforward there. And this is everything that you can kind of see there, right? So basically anything you want, any job history, whatever output, all of it's there for you in Snowflake.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think they did a really nice job setting that up for sure.
Absolutely.
And then the final step is, I think, actually, or maybe not the final.
I think it's close to the final step in terms of coding. So basically, all that's really left here is just saving as tables, moving things around, and putting things where you want them to be at this point.
Yeah, cool.
Great. Yeah, and so here's just like a side-by-side view. Whenever you're returning, you're going to get back, and then just going through the whole Snowflake worksheet again.
And by get back, it like shows up in your console as like output, right?
The console view will be a lot clearer for you to view things on.
Yeah, cool. Awesome.
Cool.
And then I guess there's a way to actually push the code in as a store procedure so you can reuse the code in Snowflake, right?
Makes it really nice, clean and simple. Nothing too difficult. Once you have it, it's there for you to keep.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I love the fact that they put that into the Snowsite UI. So that's really great. And I guess you can see the procedure there. That's good. Awesome. So Ayush, I got to tell you, like there was some typing you had to do, or at least some cutting and pasting. Like you're an Ascend field engineer, so you're probably biased, but do you feel like some of that stuff could be automated by Ascend, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the things that you're seeing here in terms of bringing things in, being able to kind of get the schemas from there, work with whatever data you have and making sure that it's running whenever you make a change or whatnot, not having to rerun the whole thing. All of that is kind of what you're going to do in Ascend, right? So here we have a couple options. Sorry, I was just going to say, here we have a couple options that explain kind of what's happening here in Ascend. John, if you want to talk about it a little bit more, that's up to you.
Yeah, sure. I think, one of the things that Snowpark allows you to do is run sort of arbitrary things from your local machine, and you can load it as a store procedure. Ascend, I think we take that a step further, and we actually put a method contract into play, where the contract is essentially three things that matter. One is input session. So you need a Spark session, which in a Snowpark, this is a PySpark version, but in a Snowpark version, you get a Snowpark session. You get a list of input data frames. So if you have a bunch of data that's coming in, you also get that. And then you get credentials, because maybe you have to reach out to go do certain things with certain credentials. So you get a list of credentials. And with this method contract, then we can return a data frame, which ends up being a table. So I think we can Ascend is going to wrap a whole bunch of this work into a method signature that you'll get to put together using Snowpark as a language. So I think I think it's fair that the stuff you had to do on the left was what you were going to do maybe for the Snowpark lab, maybe extended a little bit, right?
Yeah, a lot of, like you mentioned, John, basically all the wrapping that comes around it, being able to set up, close down, whatever that is, Ascend will handle a lot of that for you. And hopefully that comes through in the lab when we work through it a little bit later. Yeah. But that's kind of the idea here.
Yeah, and I think some of the stuff that maybe the Hello World example does some of this work, but it doesn't really point out at scale, like at enterprise scale, what matters. But like the logging, for example, like consolidated logging is really important, I think, in an enterprise environment. So how do you get your logs? How do you do at scale stuff like managing maybe Kubernetes or like a cluster, or how do you manage like multiple data inputs and all that stuff? I think that's really important. That list on the right is pretty short though, huh, Ayush?
It does make it pretty nice, yeah. And I think sometimes people might struggle to see that so much of this is abstracted away, because I think we do a good job of being able to tell them, we keep it simple so you don't have to do much extra work. But there's a lot of stuff going on in the back end that we're able to say, you don't have to worry about it. We're just doing it for you.
Awesome, great. So, so you're saying then that this life cycle is a lot simpler in a sense because we take care of a lot of the background stuff, like actually saving a table, figuring out what the naming conventions should be, letting you combine source control and do all that kind of stuff, right?
Exactly.
Ayush?
Yeah. And so that means you can move between your local environment to whatever is existing in the cloud, however you want to work, whatever your work is, whatever your development process is, whatever your iteration process is, you kind of name it, we're able to kind of do it for you. And so everybody's able to use it to as much of a degree as they want.
Yeah, cool. And I know I'm a fan of this too, writing test cases for PySpark and for Snowpark jobs, which is really kind of nice. So you can have an actual assertion that like actually checks that your logic is correct. That's like super important. I know I'm a test guy, so test first writer. So that's something I pay attention to. Great. So okay, I think you're ready for the lab, Ayush. We're just going to do 3 quick things in Ascend to replicate that lab, right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. Well, I'll show you guys the instructions and whatnot, but in case you guys aren't familiar with Ascend, this will just be what it looks like. We'll kind of jump into it and we'll go over it. And if you have questions at any point, feel free to walk through. But we'll just give you a quick introduction. This is what it'll end up looking like when you're working through transforms. Basically, all we'll be touching on here is changing some names, changing some code, and that'll be pretty straightforward. Nothing too extravagant.
Great. All right, awesome. Well, let's get started. I think we're at the bottom of the hour, so let's get going. Yeah, you want me to share the screen, or I'll stop the share
my screen. I think just so that's a little easier to click around, especially with questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. Cool. Let me share first, and then I'll kind of explain to the people here what exactly they're viewing. And so here you should be viewing my screen with effectively what the final data product will look like on the left, and the instructions that if you don't have them, we can share in the chat here via a link. I believe there was a QR code maybe, but if there's not, we'll send you a link now. But basically the idea here is all we're doing is we're creating 2 read connectors, i.e., how we're getting the tables from Snowflake. And don't worry, those will be posted in a public Ascend bucket so that you can access them. And then creating a couple of transforms that have the Snowpark, quote unquote, transforms that we did earlier, consolidated down to like 4 blocks, and working through and creating a final data product that, the same quick start guide creates on Snowflake's end. So the first thing that we're going to get started with here, and let me show you quickly what a read connector looks like for those of you who maybe are not as familiar with the Ascend platform. The idea here is that you can create a multitude of read connectors to whatever source. In this case, it'll be S3. But all we're doing is we're pulling in a CSV file. We effectively stored the table in Snowflake, or what we have as a DataFrame/table in Snowflake. We just have it saved as a CSV in S3. And then you'll be pulling that in with this lab. We're just going to create a preview of the records down here, right? And these will be basically the records you're working with for the rest of the lab. So that'll be what each of these teal blue blocks on the left are doing. They're just pulling in the data, getting it ready for you. And then what these red transform blocks are doing, which you saw, just before in the slides, those are going to be doing the Snowpark transforms that we had before. We've kind of consolidated down to whenever Snowflake in the quick start guide says, this is a new product effectively, that's what we've consolidated down to in terms of this is now one transform. We'll get in a little bit into the details, but let's walk you through what that might look like as you're actually creating it. So the first level, in case you have not maybe touched Ascend in the beginning, is to probably create the read connector connection. And so what we're referring to here is this S3 connector on the left here. And so part of Ascend is that once you create a connection to whatever source it is, whether, as you can see on the left, maybe like Google Sheets, Ascend Post, or to a Postgres connection, a Snowflake connection, whatever it is that you're pulling from, you'll store that inside Ascend, right? So we have the instructions detailed in this create a taxi domain link that should be at the top of the lab. In case you have not done that, you will need to do that here. And what that will end up looking like for you really quickly is just being able to go to new connection, hit Amazon S3. You can name the connection name. In this case, we've called it sample data sets. So you can just copy paste basically all the information that exists in a lab over. That will be how it works for the rest of the lab as well. Just feel free to copy paste everything. But just make sure it lines up with the associated field. So as you can see, we have this listing as read only, sample data sets, doesn't require any credentials. And if you'd like, you can test the connection, but this should be working as intended. It should be fine for the headbutt failing. We'll be fine to go forward. Just feel free to connect that. And then attach this bucket down here that is listed there. So you can test the connection. This should create, yeah. And so go back to the connection types once you're done, or once you've created it, and you should come back up to this page. So I'll give you guys like a minute or so in order to kind of get through that, because we will need that for the rest of the lab. Once you have that created, this will be the same connection we're using for both tables, so don't worry about that. And we will then be able to pull in the data from there. But once you're done with that, we'll go through creating the read connectors. And as I mentioned before, all the information that you have listed there will be just copy pasted from whatever's listed in this menu. So I'll go ahead and get started, and then feel free to catch up as you're going along. There should be time to kind of catch up as I explain things, but just go through, skip and configure manually. You may have noticed there's a menu there. You can go through and select whatever's there. Just might be a little obfuscated in this case because we have multiple buckets. As we mentioned, just go through, feel free to match the field to the value. So in this case, for example, object pattern matching will have the match selection. And then the object pattern will be what's listed over there. So go ahead and then select CSV at the very end. Make sure that you have the files have a header row box checked. This will be important, otherwise it won't parse correctly. And then we'll go ahead and generate the schema. So as you noticed here, this should produce the exact schema of the table that exists in the Snowflake Quick Start Guide. In this case, the campaign spend table specifically. And we'll go ahead and create this.
So Ayush, all I had to do was put in some config and I didn't have to worry about the DDL or anything. It got created automatically, huh?
All it took was these 5 pieces of information, one of which is just the name of the actual component, and you got exactly what you needed.
Perfect.
And one thing to note, John, is that in the future, if new data comes in, if you're pointing at like a more general area, you don't even have to rerun it or do it. As long as you set a refresh schedule, it'll pull it in for you. So everything kind of not requiring you to set up.
Right. Awesome.
As you can see, parses through the data, pulls it up, then you get everything that you need.
And just so we're clear, that read the data in from S3 into a stage and then loaded it into Snowflake.
Yep. And so we can change that here. So you can see there's a couple like stages where listing, reading, staging, whatever John was talking about. It goes through multiple stages where it's first is staging, then it's listing, then it's parsing. It goes through all the stages to get everything that it needs.
Great. So now that the connection's set up and you've used it once, like creating your monthly revenue should go really fast, right?
Yeah, it should. So now that you've created this, right, we've gone through, created this, we'll go ahead and skip and configure manually again. But in this case, we're just going to copy over the information as listed here. Just the same as before. In this case, I can just select match, copy over the monthly revenue version of this. And then again, a CSV parser. The files have a header row again. In this case, we'll make sure that it's a permissive mode. And this is just what to do in the case of wrong records. I think this may have been accidentally capitalized. Let me make sure. If not, I'll go through and check where that is. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, there you go.
So then I'll go through and fix that, but just make sure that you lowercase the monthly revenue in there. Not sure why it's capitalized. But in this case, the schema has now been generated. You have the year, the month, the revenue, everything we did before, create it. And so within 30 seconds, you're basically able to recreate exactly what you needed. As long as you have the information that you need to get what it is, you can easily set up.
And it'll scale up to like millions of files or whatever if you want, right? So you don't have to touch it later.
Yeah, these are fairly small tables. And I think this was probably for the case of, the Quick Start Guide being relatively fast, don't have to sit through records, but for enterprise business purposes, it'll do exactly what you need there as well.
Okay, cool.
Cool. But yeah, you can see it like we've recreated this left side of the data pipeline within, 5 minutes effectively. And that's with the explanation of, oh, this is how Ascend works, right? So in the case where you're a fairly more practiced user of Ascend or know what you're doing, you're going to take much less time. Cool. So then now that we have the left side, or what we call the ingestion side, the read connector side, whatever you want to refer to it as, now that we have that set up, we'll go ahead and create the transforms. And so this is where we're manipulating the data, working with Snowpark to actually change the data to what we want it to do. And so a brief breakdown of the structure for each of these. When we see this create the spend per channel transform, again, all you're going to do is basically just copy paste all the information over to your transform, and then you can copy paste the code into the inline code editor. Just make sure that you replace all of the code at once if you're going to copy paste it, in case you have multiple import statements, etc. This is intended to just entirely replace the code. And I'll show you what that means in a second. But let's go through these. So we're going to start with the spend per channel read connector. And if you want a description of what each of the individual transforms are doing, then feel free to look at the top. In this case, it'll just take the data from our campaign spend read connector and then group that by the year, the month, and the channel columns. So let's go ahead and do that. So remember, this is one transform by itself to replace any Snowpark kind of functions that existed in the Snowflake Quick Start Guide. So in this case, we're just going to name it spend per channel. We have our input already preset from campaign spend. That's because we left click the ellipses on the campaign spend read connector and said create new transform. So that information will be automatically filled out. If you don't have that, feel free to just copy over the pieces of information here. And then make sure that you choose your partition strategy. In this case, it'll be map all partitions 1-to-1. And you'll get the inline code editor that pops up for you. So make sure that you pick your partitions will be handle strategy, and that'll produce the code editor for you. So now let's copy this over. We'll see that that should be everything we need. Don't worry about any of the other configurations. Those will be more advanced configurations. Shouldn't really change anything about how this is running. So go ahead and create. If I copied it over correctly, so let's see what's going on here. Error here.
I think you had a little bug there, Ayush.
Yeah.
I think you have to do return df0 dot with column renamed. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me see here. Should
no, you're good.
check.
Yeah,
See, I can just copy over the code from here and make sure
that's
you guys intended. But let's do that.
Oh, I bet it was a syntax problem on the copy.
Yeah, it
paste.
should be. This should be fairly straightforward. Let me see what's happening here. If not, okay. It looks like there's a little bit of an issue here. Let me see what's going on. No worries. I think we'll just default over to here and see what's happening from here. The point is that the code should be the same. We'll, make sure that that's the case afterwards. But the point is that, as you can see here, all these Snowpark transforms will be as shown as they are here. You just have your standard group by, your standard year, month extraction, whatever the aggregation is, your sum, renaming some columns. Everything is like standard Snowpark functions that you're used to seeing. And everything that you saw in the Snowflake Quick Start Guide is exactly what you're seeing here. So that'll produce the records that we are. Let me see if I can pull this up right here. So you'll see that it's now grouped by, say, like the year, the month, the channel, and then we've aggregated, as you can see here with the total cost, we have what exists here, right? So that's all that's happening in this transform. Fairly straightforward, pretty easy to do. And the best part is we save this in Snowflake as its own kind of temporary table as it's going through the transforms as well. Cool. So that's the case with the first transform. And if you've done one transform, you've kind of done them all at this point. So the rest of the transforms are going to be pretty much exactly the same. You're just going to be copying over the information as it is and making sure that it is, working in the case that I'll fix it up so that it's working. But in those cases, you're just going to be copying and pasting over as it is. So let's go through each of those. In the case of spend per month, here we're just going to be able to consolidate it to a month column. So here we're going to be doing a bunch of pivots and selecting. So what that ends up looking like is over here. Again, we've changed our name. It's a Snowpark transform. It's a spend per channel. Then we've had the map all partitions 1-to-1. And then we've copied over the code from here and making sure that it's returning as it should be. As a result, sorry, just going to finish this up. Once we've pivoted, we get all of the search engine, social media, video, email. It kind of blows it up as intended from the channel. And then we've now grouped by year and month. So we get an actual kind of data product that you could use in a real world setting. Cool.
Yeah,
And
that's great.
Yeah, there's not too much more left to allow. I think the idea here is that regardless of what your Snowpark transform is or what you're doing from there, it's going to be fairly straightforward. For example, revenue per month, which is coming from the monthly revenue read connector in this case. And again, every time if you want, you can always left click here, create a new transform, and that'll automatically give you the inputs. That should be, again, fairly straightforward. We have our group by, our aggregate, sorting again with a with column renamed, all functions that we use in the previous campaign spend.
Sure. And you could add SQL transforms if you wanted to.
Exactly,
right?
yeah. So I can show you that right now if you would like. And so let's go ahead and create a new transform arbitrarily. You'll notice that we actually create a SQL transform initially, and you will have to transfer to a Snowpark transform to even use it. So you might have already noticed this feature of having SQL, but you do have the option of using PySpark, Spark SQL, Snowflake SQL, Snowpark. What we've seen a lot of our Snowflake users use specifically is Snowflake SQL and Snowpark because you're already within the environment. Why not take advantage of it? But yeah, you can easily fluctuate between Snowflake SQL and your Snowpark transforms, just depending on whatever your use case is for them.
And then one of the important things I think to point out, Ayush, also is that because we're providing an API and an SDK, it means that you can actually automate the movement of all these data flows within environments, right, Ayush? So you actually get this CI/CD integration with other tools. So you can take the work you did and then maybe move it to production in a programmatic way without having to actually change anything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had plenty of customers do that. People between multiple environments, people within one single environment with different allocated data services, kind of whatever the name of your game is. we can kind of handle that for you in both a programmatic and for maybe less technical folks in a non-programmatic way as well.
That's cool. And I also know just recently we were working with a customer where we're actually creating Snowpark transforms from code, which is really cool. So actually automating that at scale too. So those are just extra things that are really useful. You also get the schema information down there, right, Ayush?
Yeah. So let me pop that. So there's a bunch of useful tools here, John. You can go over the schema, but anything from like data quality checks to our partition strategy to whatever errors and warnings running to, which we saw a little earlier as well.
Yeah, that's fine.
Basically anything useful you can kind of think of when creating your transform, we've got it listed for you.
So you're telling me you can add a quality check to a transform?
You can, yeah. So I can come down here and pop it open for you. I'm not going to go too into the details, but you can do something like, let's say the column name of year. We want to make sure that it's just not null. And then whatever your failure behavior is, like, let's say you don't actually care too much about what happens there, you can do nothing. But in the case where it's an actually important column or you want to like do something, you can have it error, do that. And this exists not only in transforms, but also in read connectors as well.
So, that's awesome. So
yeah,
you can do quality checks on your Snowpark jobs to make sure that they fail the way you want them to fail. That's really cool.
So you can basically make sure throughout your pipeline, both, if you want to do it at the Snowflake level, you can go ahead and do it there. But Ascend will already kind of preempt that if you want to check the behavior yourself at that point.
That's cool. That's cool. And I think this component too handles two data frames.
Exactly.
Right? Actually
so I want to just point this out. This will be kind of a unique one. And you'll notice before we get into it, like this DAG will show you what the dependencies are ahead of time. So you'll be kind of aware of what's pulling from what. But in the case that, let's say we wanted to create one, let's say we're going to actually create a new transform and we want a new input. What you're actually going to do at this point, and so let me scroll down. Sorry. Let me scroll down to that so you see. So you see that we actually have two inputs listed here, which upstream data set will be input 0 and input 1. And you notice that we only have input 0 listed initially when you click the create a new transform option from a different transform or read connector. So you actually have to add another input. And so that will actually happen by you clicking the add another input button and then selecting whatever that input is, right? And you can add an arbitrary amount of inputs. So it can be 3, 2, 3, whatever. Because what ends up happening here is when we click the map all partitions 1 to 1 is we actually just list your inputs for you. So then to get them, you would just put, df1 equals 1.
So that's how I consistently get the right input and the right index in the list, right?
Exactly.
So I know
whatever,
exactly which one I want.
There's a reason it's listed as input 0. It's because that's where it is in the list. So
okay, cool. Yeah, no. I mean, that works, right? So you can have any number of inputs coming in, and then but we only support a single output, right?
Right. So that's the important thing to note here is by the end of it, you're only going to be returning this, singular data frame. You can't return multiple outputs. And I think that has to do a lot with, the declarative implementation we have at Ascend here and trying to make sure that when you're working through the pipeline, you are going to stick to kind of this one game flow or game plan of working through the data flow.
Yeah, so you're thinking about a single outcome per transform. And then if you want multiple outcomes, then you're building multiple transforms, right?
Yeah.
But that's okay because the platform's gonna not only automate at scale which ones to execute, but also keep them all up to date, right, Ayush?
Yeah. So you notice here,
that's cool.
Here actually, but let me just close out here. But yeah, you'll notice that we have an up-to-date, visibility marker, I guess, for lack of a better term. But things, if they're not up to date, they will be showing, in this parsing state or whatever state they're actually in. They will be made aware of that.
So if you edited the spend per channel one and made a change to it, what would happen?
Yeah, let me see. Based on the code earlier, I'm not sure if this will work, but basically all that'll end up happening is, so let's take, in this case, let's just say we don't sort, for example. Let's just say it'll update. It might go into error state, but the important part here is you'll see immediately that it's going to go into this running schema inference, and then, something will, take off from there. In this case, it'll go running. So, it actually worked luckily. But in this case, it's running. It'll go back into an up-to-date state once it's done pulling in the data again or making whatever changes that it had in mind.
What about the ones downstream?
Exactly. Is once that's done running, it'll propagate its changes downstream automatically. And if you're worried about it, you can kind of pause whatever's happening downstream so the changes don't get impacted later on. But the point is that if you make a change, whether it's at this level or this level or this level, everything that from that level and downwards will be impacted. Everything that is, of course, touched by that transforms actual logic changes.
So I don't have to rerun the entire flow to make a change
absolutely
in the middle.
No.
Okay.
Obviously, if you make like a code change that changes the logic here and it breaks the logic downstream, that'll cause an error. But that's part of building a pipeline.
Right. Sure. Great. Awesome.
Cool. Yeah,
that was really great. Ayush, I'm glad we got to cover data quality and a couple other things at the end too. That's really good.
Yeah, glad I got to show you guys. I think it's one of the cool features we have here.
Good. I see Josh smiling because he sees lots of Snowpark.
Yeah, well, and I think the thing I love with Snowflake, geez, a piece. I'm trying to combine Snowpark and Snowflake. With Snowflake and Ascend is, at its core, Snowflake has these incredibly useful building blocks for customers to be able to build these things on. But what you get by combining Ascend with that is that fully automated ability to not only build the pipeline, but then, as you talked about, to then monitor quality, to assure that your end users have trust in it, to have that be able to be governed. So it's really bringing all of those pieces together that I think is such a compelling opportunity for customers.
Thanks for that, Josh. Really appreciate you. Really appreciate you coming in a little ad hoc. I was like, "Hey, Josh, you wanna join us? We're gonna have some fun." So appreciate it. Thanks, Paul. With that, I think we've seen a little bit of everything today. I want to turn it over to you to maybe summarize and close us out. What do you think?
Yeah, thanks, John. Wonderful job, everybody. And thank you so much for all of the great information that was shared today and captured on the recording as well for those that are going to be watching on demand. Just a quick reminder to the audience that if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and get those in. I guess one of the questions that kind of came through, I'm kind of monitoring the chat as we're going through here, is the typical question about, this is awesome, how do we get more of it, right? Like what's coming next and that kind of stuff. And Josh, I don't know if there's anything that you could share, maybe some of the announcements that came out at the summit a couple of weeks ago around Snowpark. I know this is a big area of investment for Snowflake.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a couple things that'll be in the pipe. So one is bringing pre-trained models already into Snowflake. So with Snowpark, you have not only the ability to build data pipelines, you can build machine learning models, you can train those models, you can deploy those models, you can use those models as a part of your pipeline. But what we're bringing are things like automated anomaly detection, time-based forecasting, being able to look at for a change in a time dimension, what are the contributing factors to that? So those will come both through just a SQL interface, but then also being able to be built into your pipelines. The other piece that we talked a lot about that was really exciting for folks is we are building what we're calling Snowpark Container Services, which is going to allow you to run any type of compute, whether that be GPU or CPU enabled. Which means that, for some of the use cases where GPU type compute instances are more effective for processing, being able to leverage those. And again, the beauty of all this is that what Snowflake is really doing here is we're building these core building blocks, these foundational building blocks that Ascend is now going to be able to seamlessly integrate and automate along those pipelines.
That's awesome. Yeah, can't wait to see some of that stuff come through. And yeah, we definitely heard a lot of excitement ourselves at Snowflake Summit around all this stuff. Everybody's thinking about large language models all of a sudden, right? Everyone's thinking about creating their own kind of ML ops pipelines and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great to see Snowflake kind of jumping at that opportunity as well as Ascend, right? With John, with some of the stuff that we're doing, trying to help automate those things. And at the end of the day, right, it's about getting your data into a presentable state so that you can then go and train those models and use all of these great innovations that are coming out from Snowflake, and being able to do that together in a partnership with an interface that basically is doing all the work that's pushed down into Snowflake is really awesome. So
yeah, I think Snowflake and Snowpark are bringing like all that huge capability, and I think the value that Ascend is adding is the maintenance and management and operational burden can stay flat then, so you can continue to use the amazing platforms, but at the same time, as your data scales, or if you're growing exponentially, your workload is not growing exponentially. Your humans can continue to operate larger and larger systems without having to hire more humans. So I think it's really important.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got exciting times ahead. I don't think one of the questions was sort of, what's next in this content series, because I think folks have seen a couple of really good webinars and they're curious. I don't know. I usually probably don't want to announce what the next what the next lab is going to be here on this one. But I guess the answer to the question would be stay tuned, and we will definitely reach out, because there is a lot more to uncover here when it comes to doing really cool stuff with the cutting edge technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can speak, I can speak like generally on what the idea will be here. I think we've been doing a lot on the Python side of things. We'll probably get into maybe some advanced configurations in Ascend, just being able to go over what people are able to do, what partitioning is, those sorts of ideas. But we'll see where it goes from there.
Excellent. Yeah, well, and if you have anything in particular that you'd like to see, please feel free to reach out and let us know. we'd be happy to kind of tailor these things going forward to what our audiences are looking for, what the people that are actually doing work in Ascend are looking at. So we'll be sure to make sure we do that as we go forward. But with that, I think we've kind of gotten through most of the questions that people have today. So again, thank you to all the panelists, John, Ayush, Josh, for being on with us today and sharing all this great information. I learned something absolutely with all these great minds together. And I know that the people on the line did as well. And so we really do appreciate your time today. And thank you to everybody else who joined as well. And looking forward to engaging with you on the next one. So please keep an eye out for when that comes through, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.